I'm Professor John Rolfe, and I'm here to talk about environmental report cards. In the slides that follow, you will see a lot of examples of different types of report cards from around the world. And if you watch as the slides come through, you will realise that they come from different countries, that they tackle different issues, but they all have some underlying characteristics. Their purpose is to summarise science and make it more accessible and interactive for communities. They do this by providing simple but very powerful assessments of the condition of an environmental system. And the idea is that by doing these regularly, such as each year, it allows changes to be identified. Now, they're most widely used to assess the conditions of water and coastal systems, particularly in the United States and Australia, but you can find examples from a lot of other countries around the world. Well, they're called report cards because their purpose is a little bit like school report cards. There's a lot of monitoring goes into most environmental systems, but it's too difficult or it's too complicated and complex to report that to the general public. So the idea is that monitoring is reported in a way where the most important elements are considered. It represents some rigorous and impartial testing, and then it's summarised up into some grades, and that represents the current standards that are achieved, just like in a school report card. Most are done annually, so this example from Chesapeake Bay has been done since 2006. The South East Queensland report card has been done each year since 2005. Now, report cards deal with very complex environmental systems, and because they're so complex, it's easier to summarise their health through a small number of key indicators. And picture graphs and scientific systems are used to communicate the complexity of the systems involved and the reasons why only a small number of key indicators have been selected. So the way in which report cards work can be thought of as in 5 key steps. The first step is to select the most important things to measure. The second is to assess their condition at a point in time, usually each year. The third is to compare that condition to a standard or baseline, like what the ideal conditions should be or what the historic average was. That comparison is then used to calculate scores for each of the indicators, and then those indicators are aggregated up, so the scores for each indicator are aggregated up into an overall grade. As I said earlier, most report cards have focused on water assets because these are usually really important to local communities and they're very complicated to assess. So examples include river catchments or watersheds, estuaries and coastal zones, or marine assets such as the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. And the purpose of the report card is to summarise up the various indicators and give an overall grade for condition. So at a glance, you've got a sense of how the asset is faring. Now, while report cards have usually started with a focus on water assets, they're not the only things that are necessarily included. So examples of other types of aspects that might be covered include ecosystems such as wetlands, coral or seagrass, biodiversity such as fish, crabs and birds, or human dimensions such as social, cultural and economic aspects. The purpose of report cards is to get a level of engagement going between communities and scientists. So the design helps to link communities with technical experts, but because they design with community aspects in mind, the case studies and community aspirations differing means that each report card tends to vary a little bit. So some are focused on environmental systems, while others focus more on human dimension and environmental pressure factors depending on what the technical experts in the communities think is important. While report cards largely focus on what the condition of the different assets are each year, some report cards also include some consideration of the background drivers and pressures on the systems. They might also include examples of progressive actions and interventions, what's being done to protect the assets, and recommendations about policies to make a difference. These report cards are really important in terms of making science and monitoring more interactive for communities, and I expect that we'll see a lot more of them develop into the future. Thank you for your attention.